Hey, Kids Cook Real Food community, Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector, where, as always, we strive to connect you parents who so desire to raise healthy, independent adults with the experts who have the information you need. Today, we're talking about social and emotional learning and how that happens all the time at the dinner table and in the kitchen. So how can we capture those moments? How can we be more intentional and teach our kids to navigate their big emotions, to improve their social communication, and most importantly, how we can keep it really simple and doable for busy parents, right? Things we're doing anyway, just refining them a little bit. So I'm very pleased to host Elizabeth Sautter. She's a speech therapist, speaker, and author, and she is a guru in the field of social and emotional learning. Thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I just want the audience to understand kind of where you're coming from, and then we will jump right in. And Elizabeth is the co-owner of Communication Works, speech therapy to schools in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also she's the founder of Make Social Learning Stick. And she provides consultation, training, and resources, and is the co-creator of the Make It Stick parenting online course and community. She's gotten all sorts of awards and wrote a book called Make Social and Emotional Learning Stick, Practical Strategies to Help Your Child Manage Emotions, Navigate Social Situations, and Reduce Anxiety. Oh my goodness, do we need this right now or what? We need it always, but now I think more than ever, as we're, the world's a little bit crazy here. Most importantly though, and we'll talk a little bit about this, she's a mom of 2 teen sons with some additional needs. And she's also a therapist. And so Elizabeth is really passionate about supporting children, teens, and families with social and emotional learning. This builds a foundation, right? It's builds a foundation for all the other learning we do. So tell us a little bit about your background. Like, where did this passion for social and emotional learning, specifically in kids, come from?
So, as you mentioned, I am a speech and language pathologist, and in the field of speech therapy, we focus on communication, all things communication. And back in grad school, many, 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 many years ago, I became very interested in autism and behaviors. And I worked at a school and learned a lot about social, which is one of the hallmark challenges of those on the spectrum of autism. And I opened a center and we ran a ton of social groups. And within those social groups, the kids would come to us for an hour, hour and a half, sometimes in group and individually, once, twice a week. But realistically, the information needed to be also given to the parents for them to infuse into their home life, because their kids weren't going to just walk out of there saying like, oh, I've learned how to be flexible and I'm going to have a conversation now and I know exactly what to do in these situations that I'm going to be in, at birthday parties and recess or at home at dinner time, whatever. And so what we found is that, it was our model and so beneficial to be pulling in the parents for every session and teaching them what this looks like at home and how they can sprinkle this into their everyday routines and activities. And so the parents would ask me, will you write a blog? Will you write a book? And I said, oh, yeah, I know. And so I started writing a blog a little bit. And that was fun to share some information. And then I had my own kids. And they started to become school age. And my older son was having some challenges getting his name on the board and being benched at recess. Don't get me started about those disciplinary tactics, but that's what was happening. And so I got curious and dove in a little bit to see what his needs were. And they were around social emotional learning and executive functioning. And so I really realized, how important this was. Even myself, I thought I was going to be such a great parent as a therapist, but really, being a parent has made me a better therapist. And so yeah, when my older son was in therapy and getting a lot of the support, and I would get all these worksheets and things to do at home with him, and they would sit on the kitchen counter staring at me. And I would feel like, guilty mom not doing all of them, even though I knew the importance of them. But then I realized that they could really be infused into the things that we were already doing. And so that's what I got very passionate about, and why I wrote the book, Make Social and Emotional Learning Stick, to show parents that these things are things that we're doing already. Like it or not, we are models for our children, and how we're setting up their environment and talking to them and interacting and teaching them on a daily basis are social emotional, and that we can do it in a more intentional way, like you mentioned, and equipping us, giving us the equipment and knowledge for how to do this in the car, at the dinner table, at birthday parties, and at bedtime. All these things can then calm our nerves so that we can then be that model that we want to be for our children.
That's wonderful. I love that you admit to leaving the worksheets staring at you from the counter. Like, even as like you're a therapist and you knew that this practice was important. Because I mean, I do that too. There's so much guilt, like, oh shoot, they just went to bed. And I forgot to do this again.
Yep.
So it's so perfect to say, well, how do you make something stick? You don't do it on a worksheet, right? I don't
No.
think anyone has ever shown that worksheets like make things stick, especially habits that you want kids to bring to the world.
Right. Yeah.
These aren't write it down skills.
Right. And some of them, you can learn some information, and I use visuals all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then, these are what we're doing every day with our children. And so helping them navigate these situations can be done either in the situation or before the situation, and then also after the situation. So there's just so much that can be used throughout our everyday lives with them. So that's my mission, is to show parents in a simple way so that they also don't have to feel overwhelmed themselves by all of the curriculum, all of the webinars, all the things out there that are good information. Don't get me wrong, I'm giving those trainings, but there are simple things that you can do.
Which is so great. And I mean, our kids need those soft skills, the skills that aren't in textbooks. We know that knowing how to interact socially well, how to regulate your emotions, this is going to help kids reduce stress. This is going to help kids increase their confidence. Both of those things will ultimately help them even be healthier in their bodies. So let's start with, how do we teach kids to navigate those big emotions? What can a busy parent who has like not even 2 minutes to rub together do at the dinner table, which, hint, hint, hopefully you're already doing, everyone, at least a few times a week. What can we do at the dinner table to incorporate this idea of emotional regulation?
Yep, I'm so excited to talk about this in the kitchen and the dinner table. I couldn't keep that to like one page. My book is divided up into 4 sections: home, community, holidays, special events, and most of them are like, page just to sprinkle like little, I'll show you, just little activities in boxes to not overwhelm as well.
Yeah.
But the kitchen and the dinner time and at the table, I had to sprinkle over a couple of pages. So first things first, I want to say that it starts with us as parents, and realizing that can be overwhelming, because then you're like, oh, here she goes talking about self-care and all the things that I should be doing to, think about myself and my own mental health and whatnot. But it really, really does. And that's like, why in our course, in our community, it's a pathway, it's a process, and it does start with the parent. And so we have a journal, not only for tracking the strategies that you're using with your kids, but how you're supporting yourself. And it's not just about going on walks or, doing your yoga or mindful breathing, whatever it might be. It's also how we're talking to ourselves, that self-compassion. So, not feeling guilty or saying, oops, I forgot to do those worksheets, well, maybe talk to the therapist about how we can infuse these in different ways, because it's not really working for our family, or, not beating yourself up at the end of the day for how you might have raised your voice at your child, or whatever it might be. So making sure that you're talking to yourself in a way that is supportive, because what's going to happen is, an analogy that we've heard many times is oxygen mask to yourself, but also just thinking about it in the analogy of, the kitchen is not, if you don't have water in your pitcher, then if your child asks for a cup of water, you're like, oh, sorry, the pitcher's empty, I have nothing to give you. So making sure that there's that water or whatever it might be in your pitcher so that you have it to give to others. And then in a simple way, there's so many things we can talk about at the dinner table to practice this with yourself and with your child. But one thing that comes to mind off the top of my head is just, less than a minute, is just as you're sitting down, you take one breath for you, and one breath for your child.
Hmm.
And maybe it's even going around and each one of you taking a different kind of breath. Maybe
Hmm.
it's, the rainbow breath or the hot chocolate breath or whatever it might be, and making up different kinds of breathing strategies can be really helpful as we train our nervous system to calm down when we're sitting down and we're being connected with each other.
Mm. One thing my husband and I talk a lot about, our kids now are at this point in time, 6, 9, 12, and 16.
Mm,
And we just keep saying, boy, the awareness of like their world is just sometimes not there. They bump into people and don't say, oops, excuse me, or like, they've left something out. And I'm like, how do they not see that they left the meat on the counter? I don't get it. So what, and with social awareness is huge,
yeah.
being able to sort of read other people. So is there something we can do at the dinner table to increase social awareness?
Absolutely. So there's so much. I mean, this is actually twofold. A lot of the things I'm going to be mentioning to you today are combined. They're social and emotional,
Sure.
because the emotional piece of it is the foundation. If you're able to calm yourself and understand the emotions in others, understand the emotions in yourself and others, then you're able to interact in a way that I can see that this person is sad. So then the words that you would use, the tone that you would use are very different than if somebody
Yeah.
was happy in whatever they might be showing in that situation. So we always want to bring awareness to nonverbal communication, context around you, including the people and the objects. And there's so much of that, at the dinner table and in the kitchen. So you can play nonverbal games, by just zipping up your no voice, putting it in your pocket, and just saying, let's practice just talking to each other with our eyes and our body language. So you can pass certain things using eye contact. You can give choices, like I'm holding up right now an orange and an apple. Say, which one do you want? Show me with your eyes, so that you can then clue into the nonverbal cues of what they are wanting. You can use a talking stick. This is a spatula. You can just pick up a spoon, whatever it might be, a knife, not a sharp knife, of course, but and pass it around for giving somebody a talking stick and having them take turns. At our dinner table, we have one child who likes to talk a lot and one who, oh, don't give me that talking stick. So it's nice to be able to have a spotlight, but share the space, and really practice that waiting and listening with nonverbal communication as well. We call it whole body listening. And then also giving some choices to what that would look like. So some kids really listen better when they're in movement, and sitting at a table can feel really confined and overwhelming and be dysregulating. So thinking about that, we have a trampoline right by our dinner table, and it's fine. We teach about doing chair push-ups, which are putting your arms on the side of your chair and pushing up and down.
Huh.
So there's all kinds of things that you can teach. And in our course and community, we go through a whole process of figuring out what those ladders might be, which we call our tools, to get out of the pitfalls. So when you might fall into a pitfall at dinner time, in a challenging situation, and then what are your ladders, your tools to get out of it? So those could be chair push-ups. They could be deep breathing, like I mentioned, putting your hand on your belly and breathing in and out. They could be using positive self-talk, like, I only have 10 more minutes until dinner's over, I can do this. Um, there's so many different ways that we can stay emotionally regulated as we are staying connected and practicing some of these nonverbal communication skills for building better social communication.
Wow, neat. It's interesting that you mentioned the trampoline and the chair push-ups and the like confinement of sitting at the table, because a lot of parents, when I talk about picky eating, they share that one of their biggest challenges at the table is that the kids won't sit at the table. We call them the runners. What do I do? What do I do about the kids who are running around or who are like constantly leaving and coming back? And I mean, I have certain perspectives on that, but I would love to hear what your answer would be for those parents with this perspective.
Well, first, I think that it's important for us to realize that all kids are different,
Mhm.
and their ability. You have one kid who can sit for the entire dinner and leaning in and with conversation and whatnot. I see this at my friend's house. It's not that way at our house.
Uh-huh.
Um, And so all kids are different. And so we need to be careful about making judgments and shame and blame with that. But we can do some collaborative problem solving and asking them, we at our family, it's our value to be together for dinner time. And I notice that it's hard for you to sit with your body still. And it's sometimes distracting when you're moving around. What do you think could help? And maybe you could come up with different strategies with the child if they're old enough to process with you. But there are so many different things. And I would also recommend practicing, when it's not dinner time. So when it's not a loaded situation. And also having increments where they could take breaks and do things that make them, that feel like, oh, it's not just going to be this half an hour long sitting quietly situation, but I can take breaks and come and go. But at the dinner table itself, there's tons of strategies, but like things that you might not think of, like putting a piece of Velcro underneath the table where they can use that as like a non-discrete, or not a discrete fidget for like being able to do something with their hands while they're listening to somebody else. I mentioned the chair push-ups.
Yeah.
There's tons of fidgets that could be at the dinner table. And then just asking them maybe some of the things that make it easier for them. Maybe you're playing a game while you're having dinner together. And that could even be like building a conversation tower, which is part of your dinner time. And you can do that with like having, the Jenga blocks, the Jenga game where you build a tower. Well, everybody can have their own blocks. And so everybody might have 5 or 10 blocks and you're taking turns adding a comment or asking a question as you are building a tower together. So that also keeps them busy in a more engaging, fun way for some children.
Wow, those are great. Those are great. And I think, the most important thing is to give the kids grace,
Yeah.
to understand that that is difficult and make some boundaries, right? That are acceptable to you as the parent, but we need to allow our kids to be kids too, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah. And kids to be kids. And also some, all brains are different and all bodies, nervous systems are different and what their needs might be. And so setting them up for success in those situations, knowing your child as you as the expert and setting them up for success too is also, if you know that sitting for a long period of time or, even 15 minutes can be long for a lot of children, is difficult, then maybe they do that running around outside before they come in for the dinner table, so they can get those feel good breaks and be able to regulate their nervous system for then being able to come and be together for that focused period of time.
yeah, that's great. That's great. When we think about, dinner time, there's a lot of conversation. And you mentioned that one of your sons is like, oh no, I don't want to have conversation. And that's, like another variant in kids' personalities. But we do know that kids, I think, are experiencing more social anxiety than ever. And then that worry and that concern that just sort of festers in their little hearts. So what are some like conversations or strategies that parents can have that model that healthy social interaction?
I think first thing to say is this also is really important for the emotional regulation piece is to do some check-ins. So, if they kind of know what the structure of the mealtime is going to look like, where you talk about your highs and your lows, maybe it's your thorns and your roses, or, whatever it might be, where they can think, okay, we're going to dinner table. Maybe you have a check-in earlier in the day, and then they can practice sharing it with the rest of the family. So they
Like to
kind of,
plan ahead what they're going to say.
yep. So
Oh, cool.
it's called priming actually. In the work that we do for social emotional learning is priming them for success, just like you would like as a scrimmage in a sports game or, or like an attorney would do a briefing before the trial. So it's, setting your child up for success. And this is the dinner time conversation, but this is all things. So, when you're driving in the car with your child and you have an errand to run and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell them that we were going to stop here. And, they wanted to go home and it was their time to, do their art or their computer time, whatever it might be. And now you stop and they have this big explosion. Well, that's because we didn't let them know. And, children, need that rehearsal and the control of what's happening in their lives. We think about it, they're sitting in the back seat of our cars and we're driving them, and they're sitting down, and we chose the dinner, and this is our dinner time, whether they're hungry or like it or not. And so being able to help them, prime them, and give them some sort of control and choice in the situations can really set them up for success as well.
That's wonderful. And then, I mean, when I think about social anxiety with at least my kids, sometimes it's because there are mean kids out there, people who aren't in our family, although sometimes siblings too, right? Will just say mean and awful things. Can we help kids build resilience and a thicker skin?
Absolutely. I think that like most of this comes from, the deep work of doing things outside of those challenging situations. So helping them to really understand social and what it means to think about others, have compassion for others, and also build that self-confidence with themselves, like that, knowing that how it feels when somebody says something that is, mean and cruel, that you have that phrases that you teach them, just like, hey, dude, that's not cool, or no thanks, or teaching them how to be an upstander for their friends can also build that self-confidence to be that upstander for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when they see these challenging situations. And I think that what really can be helpful is talking about various scenarios when they're not happening. So say somebody says this to you, how are you going to stand up for yourself in a confident but not, combative way that's going to throw oil on the fire. And you can do this with siblings really easily in terms of role play and just, writing out various scenarios and rehearsing what you could do in those situations. Another way to do it too is through literature. There's a lot of great books out there, and I have a ton of books on my website under free resources. And movies too, movies and YouTube clips where you can pause and talk about what's happening in these situations. How would you handle that? What do you see the problem is here? And why do you think he did that? And trying to help them not take these situations personally, that it's really not about them, it's about the other person.
And I think what you're saying too is, movies and YouTube clips like that could be a situation where you're not like seeking out a specific social learning movie. You're just watching a show with your kids.
Yep.
Situation occurs, right? And the character is going to have to respond, right? Hit pause and say, "Ooh, that was an interesting situation. How would you respond if you were that character?" Right? Like that.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
following their interests with their shows and whatever they like to do can be fun. And they're, they can even
Yeah.
be, Minecraft or whatever it might be. We watch a lot of funny shows like The Middle or the Goldbergs, family shows like that. And all of them are based on a problem situation.
Right.
So, then just pausing it and talking about it either during the movie or a YouTube or a show. And another thing is you want to prime your child for pausing, because they're like, what are you doing? Why are you pausing this? We were watching it. So
Yeah.
all of those things, setting them up for success in those ways can be helpful as well. But yes, absolutely follow their lead and figure out how you would. We watch a lot of Shark Tank at my house with my
Okay.
son, and I love Shark Tank. And so pausing it and saying, oh my gosh, they just really, Mr. Wonderful just really slammed her. How would you handle that? How do you think she feels? What should she say?
Uh-huh. Oh, that's great. And that it takes a lot of executive functioning in the parent to do this, because almost every one of your answers is like plan ahead, future cast for them. And I'm like, ooh, like that's starting to sound a little bit overwhelming. Any strategies for parents just to like, how do we remember to do this? And what if we haven't, we're in the situation where I forgot to tell them I'm going to pause, or we're going to stop, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
moment. Do you...
No, I think that giving yourself grace 100%. And I think that, I think that you just having some information that might happen, maybe you thought about it after you watched the Goldbergs, and you can say, hey, remember when,
Hmm.
this happened in the show, and then you can bring it up again. But I also just, having the knowledge of storing it in your mind and just realizing that these are things that can happen here and there, and you don't need to have it be a planned situation. And if it doesn't happen that time, it'll happen another time. But just knowing that these are interactions that you're having with your child, they're watching you, you're reading with them, they're watching TV, can be situations. You can even, maybe it is a planned situation where you go to the coffee shop if you're out in public these days, and you're doing some people watching to just watch the nonverbal social cues. It's just like that extra bit of knowledge in your brain to realize that all of these situations that we're in with our children are social and emotional situations. And so that you can use the real life times versus needing to like read a book about it or, and learn a whole curriculum to teach social emotional learning. So
Right.
absolutely give yourself grace and don't feel bad by beating it up. The other thing is too, like, if you forget about a situation, like I had a situation that happened yesterday and I did not handle it well. So, I'm going to talk to my son. I said, hey, you know what, remind me later, because he was about to go on Zoom before this call. And I said, I owe you an apology. Will you come find me later? All of these times, that in itself is social emotional learning and modeling how you might handle apologizing instead of saying like, oh, he knows I'm sorry about that. But no, it's good for me to follow through with telling him and showing him what that could look like.
Oh, that's neat. I mean, the great thing about parenting is that it is 18 years long. And so we have many opportunities every single day of all those years, right? So it's not like we have to seek perfection and, capture every single opportunity. Like there will be many more. And so we can prime our own brains like, oh yeah, I missed it that time.
Yes.
I'm just even thinking about this weekend, both my little boys, he had baseball games. And the one thought he'd be playing a friend, he said, oh yeah, we're gonna trounce him because I heard his, team has lost a bunch this year. I said, oh, really? And I was distracted. I didn't enter into conversation. Now, of course, he ended up losing the game. And after it, I was like, oh, I totally should have said, well, what if you do lose? What if you don't win? How would you feel? And it was totally an opportunity, but we have many more baseball games.
Well, yeah. And I think that also too, we got to be careful too about the shoulds, right? So like, blaming and shaming and like that self-compassion that we want on ourselves. It's like, they're all opportunities for just awareness and curiosity and, being present and conscious of, learning as we go, and not perfect, like, absolutely. Right. Like, I don't think we want our kids to think that you have to be perfect. And so just like showing them that like, I messed up here, or, hey, I forgot to talk to you about this, or whatever it might be, is perfectly fine. I think if we have the awareness about that and then take that conscious awareness as an opportunity in itself, that in itself is social emotional learning.
Yeah. And, we have lots of failure opportunities in the kitchen. Obviously, I'm a huge proponent of teaching kids to cook. And I tell parents all the time that the kitchen is the best educational environment that we have to teach everything. So what kind of opportunities would you see working together in the kitchen to make social and emotional learning stick?
Oh, there's so many. So during the pandemic, especially, I mean, how many times were your kids asking you, what's for lunch, what's for breakfast, what's for dinner, if you're cooking for them and not with them? But that was, a topic of conversation or a question that came up a lot in my house. And instead of, this is where you can build that awareness, instead of saying, oh, spaghetti and meatballs we're going to have for dinner, you can help them make what we call an inference or social reference or observation by saying, well, actually look around. What do you see? What do you smell? And so then they can take that time to, oh, I see, pasta noodles and water boiling, and I smell tomato sauce and garlic bread. Oh, spaghetti, meatballs, garlic bread. Are we having salad too? I can cut the carrots or whatever. And so that is building like simple awareness of something very concrete, when they can then bridge that to building awareness and observational skills in their social environment, where things are happening so fast.
Yeah.
Another thing too is you can go deeper with perspective taking in terms of thinking about where the food came from.
I love
and
that.
and how it got to the dinner table and, in the pot. Think about a raisin, all the different things that happened to the raisin before it got into this box. So that can be a really good one for perspective taking. We do a lot of gratitude and appreciations around food and the people who make the food able to be on our dinner table, and also the people who are cooking and cleaning. So we rotate in our family, who's cooking and who's cleaning, and then show that appreciation as a family,
Mm.
as a big part of thinking about others and building empathy and awareness for what it takes to have a functional family and community and work in groups. Um, so I could go on and on. I'm sure you have some other thoughts to steer me in the direction that you would like more. Oh, one thing that we talked a little bit about executive functioning,
Mhm.
and cooking is huge for building, sequences and planning ahead and thinking about what you need or what ingredients you need in order to have that meal be the favorite way that
Mhm.
you want it to taste. So thinking about that, planning, maybe you have some family planning time and see what you already have in the refrigerator or the cupboard, and then you're planning your meals ahead of time. And then when you're actually cooking together, having that end in mind and sharing what that might be together. So you might have a cookbook that has visuals so that
Mhm.
they could see what it looks like. Oftentimes it doesn't always look like that when
Not
you're
quite,
cooking.
yeah.
So that's a way to talk about, the Pinterest fails or the mistakes or whatever. That's fine, still tastes the same maybe. But just thinking about what that end in mind looks like, because then you can practice. This is actually a strategy from Sarah Ward, who's an expert in executive function, that she contributed to my book. There's a bunch of experts that have contributed to my book. So she calls the strategy get ready, do, done. And you have the future sketch in mind. So that's the done first, then the get ready for all the ingredients that you might need, and then the doing.
Hmm.
And so that's an executive function strategy. Another thing too that we do in our family that's worked really well over the years, especially as schedules got so busy and crazy, and with you have more kids than I do in your household, so I'm sure it's even more, but is being able to systemize the meal planning and
Mhm.
and also make certain nights be, Taco Tuesday. We usually have Pizza Friday. Mondays are, now that my kids are older, I have two teen boys, 14 and 17, we call it Mios, make it your own self.
Ah.
And so, and we still eat together, but it's, like tonight, I'm like, oh, it's Monday. Whew, I don't have to think about it. It's decision fatigue. You're
Mm.
constantly like, what's for dinner? What's for dinner? What do I have to plan? Whatever. So just systemizing it so that there isn't that decision fatigue.
And most of these are helpful for parents' brains too, because I'm even
Mhm.
thinking about that question, what's for dinner? And when you say, what do you see? What do you smell? You're also like future proofing yourself to get that question less often. Because if the
Exactly.
kids start to expect you to say, what do you see? What do you smell? They're going to stop asking that question 25,000 times a day. So it's a bonus for you too. And you're building social and emotional learning.
Yeah.
Yay.
And they use their observational skills with their eyes and their brain. And, I think, in this day and age, that's so important because our kids are buried in their screens. And so getting them to, I get so frustrated when I see my son with his phone just coming into the kitchen. He has his phone sometimes when he's like, in front of the refrigerator and whatever. And I'm just like, can you put down your phone? This is a screen-free zone. And I
Mm,
mean, I could go on a whole tangent about that, and also about, teaching mindfulness and how
mm,
that's such a big foundational important skill for managing your own emotions, understanding the emotions in others, and then being able to be social. So being able to pause with your
mm,
um, taking into account the people around you, which is putting your screen down and
mm.
being present.
Yep. Yeah, you got to be present. You mentioned at the beginning that you worked with families with kids on the spectrum, and that your own kids have some additional needs. So I'm sure families out there with neurodiverse kids are thinking, like, do these strategies work in the same way, or do families with neurodiverse kids need to adapt them a little bit?
Some of them are, I wrote the book, as a therapist, and that's my area of expertise is supporting kids with social and emotional challenges, lagging
Hmm.
skills in these areas. And so they absolutely are geared for that population. And you might have some children who might need a little bit more support with language and cognition. And so just modify it. The book is meant to be an inspiration. There is no handbook on parenting, social, emotional, and especially when you have additional needs with your kids, you have to help them navigate these and boost their skills in these areas. So that's why I wrote this. But it's not meant at all to be, you know, do one activity at a time and a
Mhm.
script. Like, absolutely modify this for your family and for
Nice.
your needs, and just one at a time. Just get inspired by, one, you can start with dinner or kitchen, and then you can focus on another area of your life that you want to focus on, or even just take one activity, and then the activity, like the talking stick, maybe there's visual cues like the spatula that you could use in other times of the day that would be
Mhm.
really helpful, or visual schedules that could help your child with a nighttime routine or whatever that might look like. And also too, for inspiration, and just, to expand on this, at the bottom of each page, because it is context based on purpose, to realize, you can do these in your everyday routines and
Mhm.
activities. At the bottom of each page, I have what's called the hidden social rules. And it kind of goes over, that what you could help your child by priming them for what's to come in those various situations. But again, all families' dinner time looks different.
Sure.
So I gave generic hidden social rules, maybe you could call them expectations. We want to be careful about judging, though, and just thinking about, changing them. Make it what you do at your family dinner time, or what is expected for your car rides, or
Mm.
for your bedtime routine. So it's absolutely not meant to be done exactly how it's written. So change it up for your child's brains, their language levels, their cognitive levels, and your family routines and values.
Mhm. And you support parents in adjusting to their own families through your community and your course. Trying to give us like a 60-second overview of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've developed a course in community with Dr. Rebecca Brandstetter, who's a school psychologist, expert in executive functioning. We put this together for parents with all the knowledge that we have, because we train so many parents, and we just wanted to make something like this accessible for
Mhm.
parents, at self-paced on their own, with a community, so they can use us and ask questions, but so that they can access this from my book and from all of the work that we've been doing over many years and the research that's out there. And that's what I mentioned by it's a process. And there is a guidebook and 2 journals, one for yourself, one for the parents. We teach parents how to be the wise owl. I want to show you a
Aw,
little prompt I have here with my wise owl hat.
so
Um,
cute.
which stands for wisdom, intentionality, self-care, that self-care piece, and then the everyday strategies. So
Hmm.
that is within the course and the community. And we've partnered with Generation Mindful, who you're familiar with, your audience might be familiar with as well, Suzanne Tucker. And we have a little introductory free training for parents, and then a full course and community available as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, lastly, Elizabeth, I always like to leave parents with a message of hope, a promising story, or one way to, really to encourage us. What would you like to share?
I think that, this pandemic has been really, really hard.
Mm.
And I think that parents are really concerned about, um, children transitioning back to school, and maybe how their social emotional skills might be even more lagging, or they might be
Mm.
delayed in various areas. And what I really want to say, and this has happened in my family, is, we have daily check-ins, we have daily hugs. We've done a lot of, like, talking about healthy mind platter in structuring your day, and every single day includes some sort of connection, whether that's on the hammock or at mealtime. Mealtime is huge. And so I think that's kind of the silver lining that I've heard from a lot of my parents, is they've gotten to know their children more, because we're working from home and we are connected more, and we're not as scattered from our daily lives. And I think that for us, especially, or not especially, but I can say for us personally, and from what I've heard from my families that I support and many of my friends' families, this is not going to change. We are going to keep our
Mhm.
coveted time together, and maybe not plan as many things, um, sports, extra activities, events and whatnot, so that we can have that connected family time, because connection is protection, and it is the thing that is going to build that model for having your children thrive social emotionally outside of the home with their peers and in group situations as they grow.
Well, that's lovely and definitely something for us to remember. I like that connection is protection. So much research behind that, building bonds within our family and with other adults. Really, really important. So thank you so very much, Elizabeth, for coming today and helping us as parents learn how to make social and emotional learning stick. Like you said, we're doing it anyway. Like we're either doing it by default and like, let's see what happens, or we can be a little bit more intentional with the activities and opportunities that happen every day, shape our kids' social and emotional learning more intentionally in a healthier way for them. That's going to help them be more successful, grow to be healthy, independent adults. And that's what we do here at the Healthy Parenting Connector. Again, I'm Katie Kimball, always bringing you experts to connect with for you parents who want to raise healthy, independent adults. And I will see you back next week.